So I just want to say a few words. Welcome, everyone. My name is Pamela Hugdahl. I'm the Executive Director of the Rochester Arts Center. Thank you for being here on this beautiful evening to celebrate Anne Labovitz's catalog release for the Nexus of Wellbeing and Art. The exhibition is on view in the Judy and Burton Onofrio galleries through July 30th. And we're just so incredibly blessed to have Anne's support in making this exhibition possible. It's been an incredible journey. All of the programming you've brought with this exhibition has been amazing, so thank you. The exhibition was also made possible with major support from Nuss Truck Group and Nuss Truck and Equipment and Maurice's, and we can't thank them enough for their contributions. Everything that you see happening here would not be possible without the strong support of our past and present board of directors, dedicated staff, the City of Rochester, our facility partners at the Mayo Civic Center, our wonderful volunteers and docents, and the Legacy Amendment, thanks to the voters of Minnesota and our members who are the foundation of our 77-year history. Anne has given some very well-attended tours of this exhibition and is offering another one on July 15th at 1 p.m. We're also very excited for the Hippocrates Cafe Live, which will be here on July 29th at 4 p.m. with generous support from Dr. John Halberg. Tickets are available through our website. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome Anne Labovitz and Matthew Miranda.
Well, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you definitely to the staff for setting this up. This is such an amazing organization. I love this. We're literally at a waterfront right now. Thank you, Anne, for this beautiful exhibition. And so I think that, so I should introduce myself. I'm Matthew Villar Miranda. I'm a curatorial fellow formerly at the Walker Arts Center. But I'll be a curatorial associate at the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive. And we all know who Anne is. But I was when I first saw this, I was stunned because this is such a behemoth of a show. It might be your biggest show, unless it's if you all might remember, you might know Anne's work from another work that exists in our public space as we exist in our ordinary lives and our passing, which is 122 Conversations, which is this amazing scroll piece at the MSP airport. But that's not the subject. The subject is the Nexus of Wellbeing. So I was really I really love that you started off this exhibition with a question and a sense of inquiry, which is very much part of your spirit, is inspiring curiosity, which is, the question was, can color, light, and atmosphere provide a pathway to well-being? So that is something that I wanted to try to answer as we walk through the show together in this talk. But one of the most stunning things is will to meaning, which is how many feet?
That's a great question. I forgot to read what I wrote. No, I think it's 400 linear feet, which Matthew is referring to the piece that's behind us in the atrium. And it's 400 linear feet, but that actually means that it's 800 painted feet, right? Because it's double-sided. So 5 foot wide by 400 feet.
But it was so beautiful in the opening because it was in your invitation, people were sitting on the ground and they were looking up. And I remember on that opening night being I don't remember the last time I looked up. It was to look at clouds or stars. Sometimes it's in supplication to the divine. So I just really was grateful for that gesture of looking up, which became a big inspiration for responding to your work. But that's all to say is that that's a starting piece. And I think a good question is, how did you arrive at this project? Why this scale? Why painting? How did this project happen? And why in this site of Rochester Arts Center?
I got this. Okay. So as an artist, we louder. Thank you, Bill. Thank you. So as an artist, I love spaces like this. I mean, this space is the space you want because it's white, it's huge, it's got air, it's got light. The gallery spaces are gorgeous. So I was really inspired to create something both in the gallery and also in this atrium space, because I knew that the light coming from the skylights and all of the windows would actually change the work over the course of time, depending on the day or the weather. So I thought a lot about the site specificity. So all the work in the galleries and in the atrium are specific to this space. And I was so excited when Pam accepted my idea about about working together. Because I knew that this space was so glorious, and I knew that something had to happen in this atrium that could be amazing. And for me, the first time I understood space and was able to handle it kind of at a really larger scale was with this Project 122 Conversations in Japan. And I didn't really know, I had always wanted to do installation, but I couldn't imagine how to do that. So when I saw what happened when I left the building and walked back in, it changed the exterior of the building. It was like something switched inside of me, and I understood space in a way that I never had before. And so I was really eager to experiment in a three-dimensional way, because as Matthew said, the work at the airport, it's 180 feet long. So it's actually technically louder, thank you. It's technically longer, but it's shorter. And it also was really it's part of the same project. There are 70 paintings, but they weren't intended to live together and be housed in that moment, where this work was actually created specifically for this exact space to be one unit. So it's really the largest object, if you will, even though it's not round, that I've made. And then and I also think because we're near a major health facility here in Rochester, I was really interested in thinking about how health and well-being and art and creativity, and what does that mean, and how could that all be connected in some way that's meaningful in artwork. So I was thinking about how I could express that visually in some way that might be meaningful both to myself and to the audiences.
I love that the work draws you upward into the galleries. And so I think my job here is to sort of kind of show the brilliance of not only the work itself, but the curatorial decisions, the exhibitionary logic, but it draws you up. And you ascend into the second floor, and then you're kind of when you arrive, away from the panels, you get these amazing 6x6 paintings that look like abstractions that we might recognize from really 50s gestural abstractionists like Jackson Pollock, who is trying to turn psychology into gestures, or Lee Krasner, or Helen Frankenthaler. But when I look closer at them, they kind of transform. They become some of them look really electrical, some of them look like marble, but then some of them, when I look really close, are actually words. So I was wondering, wanted for you to elaborate on how the Bearing Witness series came about, and what we're seeing in those paintings.
So for those of you who've seen the exhibition, there are these 6 paintings. So they were normal paintings, as in acrylic on canvas. And those paintings were really an outgrowth of the research that I did for the exhibition, which was interviewing 9 healthcare professionals and then other sort of research. And I even it's the first exhibition I've ever put in a bibliography. So I put in that research bibliography. So just as a way of sharing kind of the research, just in case you were super interested, but also as a way to sort of as a marker, almost, for myself in a way to say, these are the things that encapsulated the last 2 years of information that really went into creating this body of work. And the question, I think, what you're getting at maybe is I did the interviews, which were audio recorded, and I didn't video them. And then when I was working in the studio, I was listening to in my ears, and those words that people were saying, I was actually writing those words verbatim. Jay was a person who was interviewed, and Sky was a person who was interviewed. And those interviews really inspired the work, because they were talking about what was meaningful to them in their own practice as healthcare providers. and how that connects with creativity and other things that they were thinking about. So it gave me an opportunity to almost like dig deeper into the idea about where that connection is. If there's a connection, what does that mean? And how can I visually represent it? And so those paintings are about kind of visual representation of, I guess it's like a different language, right? For how I was listening in English and then I was expressing that visually.
Yeah. I just wanted to emphasize another thing that's really radical about those paintings is that unlike things like Pollock or Krasner or paintings that were gestural abstractions in the 50s, the goal was to make a purity of color and form. But in your works, they're actually reversing that and insisting that it's referred to a person, to a specific psychology, to a specific perspective. And I just love that it's this idea of like witnessing. So I just loved, there's a psychoanalyst who wrote this book that's really big in the field called After Effects, but they talk about the effect of trauma. And trauma sometimes can be like stultifying and silencing. And there's no other way of processing that silence other than through gesture and artwork. And so the interviews that you did, I think you did one with Jay and with Sky, so shout out to them, but also with Lisa. Yeah. You said something to the effect of like,
Lisa Bravo.
Lisa Bravo, yes, Lisa Bravo, thank you. But I don't know if I'm gonna paraphrase it, you can help me remember, but it was something like, sometimes when words fail you, you only can rely on gesture to sort of like help process that. So, okay. Across from that, I think that I really wanted to highlight how it sits like historically, but also how amazingly research-based you are. But there's another work that just grows and compounds, which is the well-being wall. So when it was first installed, it's just this wall of hooks. But then you have these 6x6, very painterly, really beautiful tie-back panels that then just collect over time. So can you describe the well-being wall? And then, let's start there. Can you describe the well-being wall?
Sure. So the well-being wall is a place for participation in the gallery. And there are 10,000, that's a lot of squares. There are 10,000 squares, and I painted 24 different versions so that people could choose. And they're really something that requires a lot of labor and consideration for the audience. So as an artist, I'm really interested in what it means for you as a viewer to be present and for you to like participate in some way that's meaningful both to you and maybe to someone else who comes after you and who might see or experience what you've written or painted or drawn. And so those squares are, so they're not hand painted because the scale of 10,000 is sort of problematic in that sense, but they are hand grommeted. So that is like a major amount of labor. And for me, that consideration of the viewer and that relational experience is really important to be able to offer something that's meaningful. And then also just for me, I think about Martin Buber's theory of I, thou, and how it's a way of humanizing one another and also conceptually, like we're together on that wall in a certain way that becomes a community of sorts, right? And that is especially interesting to me as we move through the world and we are in a more divisive environment than we have been. And arts is a kind of a way where we can connect in different possibilities of connection.
I think that work for me you're doing a lot because there's these amazing formal moments, but that work is such an amazing social practice part, which is a really critical part of your practice. So you mentioned Martin Buber's I, thou. Could you elaborate on when you first sort of like came across that? And is it early on in your practice or is it just for this project? Or
So when I was a little kid, my grandmother and my mom is here and my brother's here, so that's kind of awesome. So they know this too. My grandmother talked about Martin Buber's philosophy of I, thou all the time. And it was like really repetitive and obsessive in a certain way, and it really hit me. And And the way she described it was, it's a moment where this philosophy of I thou, where you see someone and you have like a moment where you recognize the other, and it's like everything else sort of fades away, and you like experience the essence or somehow together of each other. And I've been really fascinated by that as a way of functioning as an artist. And it for me, okay, it's not the same thing because you're not actually physically seeing someone, but it's like a metaphor and a way of providing an experience for you to participate and you to see what each other has written or drawn, and there's a way to sort of structure for an experience of seeing one another.
Yeah, I think that what's really beautiful of that is just entered the wholeness. I see a lot of wholeness in your work. So there is no I and thou separate. They're always considered together. There's a term in Tagalog, kapwa, that is sort of an indigenous sort of idiom that both means I and you together. I think that another thing that comes to mind when I was listening to Jay's interview was that there is a separation of mind and body too, when I think that wellness is sort of integrative of both the mind and the body. And I always think about how, like, what taught us to separate these things? Like, what taught us to separate a mind and body? Was it Descartes or something? Does anybody study philosophy? The mind-body duality, anybody? But, or things like, like abstract expressionism was very inspired by people like Jung and Freud, and they've always tried to fracture the self, like the ego, the id, superego, the I and the you. And I love how the basis of your thinking or like social practice is implicating that like I and you are always together. So I really appreciate that. Another duality that comes up a lot that's really important to point out is the idea of light and darkness. So like, this is a beautiful work. Well, it's a meaning that's just flooded with light. It's literally under the skylight, you know.
Love that space.
Yeah. And then the rest of the works are like very lit. The gallery is like, you can see that there's a lot of flooding of light so that you can see the surface of the canvases. And one of the most amazing rhetorical turns is at the back of the gallery, which is like almost completely in darkness. And I'd say like I'm almost perceiving those works because they light themselves. They're illuminated. They're light boxes. I think that the darkness is you in your interviews ask all of your interviewees, narrators, contributors, like what the importance of lightness and darkness was in healing and their own healing practices, professional practices, etc. But I'm wondering if anyone has ever turned that question on you. So, yeah, what's the significance? What's the significance of lightness and darkness? Yeah, for you.
It's a good question. I mean, and of course, sometimes there's some people respond to my work, and one time this person said that I must be really happy, and I was actually really offended. I know that sounds really weird, but because it's not about that, but it can be joyful, but it's a deeper kind of consideration of life as it exists, and it's coming from a much richer and more complicated place, and so that's where the two galleries are different. The darkness is really it's like a metaphor, this kind of idea about dark and light, and I think of it a lot like how we all suffer. We all have moments that are intolerable for different reasons. And somehow it's part of the human condition, and that we need that to remind us when this moment is okay, or this moment is good, or this moment is not a disaster, at least, right? And so I feel like that's why that room is darker, and that the darkness and the lightness is a metaphor for both that of life. And those light boxes are really, if you turn them off, they're not dark, but it is fully pigmented. And so in order for the light to penetrate, my kids hate it when I say that word, I'm really sorry. Jeez. I mean, in order for the light to come through, the light windows, it has to be really bright in order to saturate and come through. And it's like, that's kind of what we have to do. We have to not, sometimes we can't choose, but in a way, we must choose the light in a way. In May, we aren't going to get up tomorrow, or I might not, if I don't choose the light. So, and it's like visual optimism, actually. The exhibition for me is really visual exploration into optimism. And instead of like a thought of optimism, even though you have all this research, which is really important to me, it's a visual kind of expression of that, because that's my language.
I actually want to go back to the well-being wall for a moment, because I just loved seeing how it grew. Just seeing, sometimes they look like affirmations, sometimes they look like love letters to another person or themselves.
Yeah.
I was wondering, like, just what was your experience seeing that grow? If that brings up any associations, or if you have any related projects that speak to that sense of growth.
Well, like the first time I came in and it was full, I was so happy, because it means that people want to and are participating and are connecting. And often as a social practitioner, you can be in a situation where people feel uncomfortable because the barrier to entrance is too high, if that makes sense. Like, you've asked something that's way too complicated. People are like, yeah, I gotta get out of here. I can't be doing that. So feels like that feels really good. And I think for me, there's a certain kind of real tenderness that comes from people sharing, and whatever people are sharing, there's a certain intimacy that I find life-giving, I guess. And it's true also of my interviews. Like, the questions aren't necessarily super deep, intimate, I'm diving in. And yet, because of the process of the way I do an interview, there's like this opening, and there's like a moment where I fell in love, right, with the person who I'm interviewing. And that for me is how I know I'm alive. And it's because the person is also leaning in and sharing a thing. And so in a way, even if someone writes a word, or it doesn't matter, what matters is, what is it? The medium is the message. Like, the underlying thing of participating is the meaningful part. Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I just love how the idea of individuality, individual gestures, become countered by that. It literally becomes more beautiful and expansive the more that people participate. I always wanted to ask you what happens to those canvases, those little,
all those squares?
Yeah, what happens to the squares? But
well, that's a great question. And I actually, what's weird is, like, they're 10,000, and I haven't really processed that. But I can tell you that today I was at a healthcare clinic that has a installation in my work. And what was really cool is there were squares involved in that participatory process, and the squares are up on the wall there, which was really nice, parallel to the actual artwork. So like the inspiration and the kind of research that happened, and that's a really wonderful marriage. And I like seeing that.
I think that I heard this number, but do you have the actual clocked in number of hours that it takes to produce works like, what's your process like, and like how long does it take to produce it? How do you set up that regimen to do this?
That's a good question. How I set it up is I go to work. So I'm a big believer in showing up at work, and my dad worked all the time, right? So I work all the time, but so I would say that I generally work like 80 to 100 hours a week, and it takes like that. The work in the exhibition is like 2 years worth of work. So I don't know what the numbers are. Someone did the math. An interviewer person did. It was so awesome. She actually told me how many hours. So like 11,000 hours or some ridiculous number of hours, which is good because, they say if you do something for 10,000 hours, what?
You're an expert.
Yeah, so I'm feeling pretty good because that only took 2 years. I'm feeling pretty expert. No, I'm kidding. But so basically for me, I just show up. Like But I also, a little tiny note about that, one of those says California on it, and I did it at my mom's house. And that's kind of cool. But it was nice to like, one of the things that I recognize sometimes I do is I will put the context in, and I love it when I do that afterwards. Sometimes I think, oh, I shouldn't do this, but it's like I want to mark that moment. And so I marked that moment because like life is long of 2 years in terms of you don't show up every day the same feeling or the same thought, you know, and even if you're listening to the same thing, it's not the same because it's a different moment. So in a way, there's like this marker of time and almost like not like a journal, but like it's quite personal. And especially if you work at the scale, like it's super physical. Yeah. It's so physical. You have to move everything all the time, and the gesture is really big. And so it's completely overtakes my person, and I love that. I love that. I love that aspect, and I love to work hard. And in fact, if I finish something too soon, I don't like it too much. Right. So I feel better if I work really hard.
What people I don't think not know about you from just seeing this show is that earlier in your practice, you're into figuration and portraiture. And to me, the idea of a portrait or figure is providing testimony. It's trying to like render light or trying to portray a spirit or person. But you move completely into abstraction and like a very gestural language. So I was wondering if there was more to say about that shift. Like, why did you shift from testimony as portrait and versus testimony as you were saying, being swallowed up by your work? But
I love the question because I think I can answer it. I'm a mom of 3 kids, so when my kids were little, I had physically less energy, right? Either I was nursing or I was pregnant, so and nobody was sleeping, right? So that's one kind of way of being. And so things were smaller, but also more intimate. Like I would do a portrait, one human being on a picture plane. And also that's a traditional way of approaching portraiture, although they were abstracted quite a bit. And I think that it slowly happened where I started to compile people together who belong together, like in some way in my brain, like a family, or they were part of a certain community, and then they could be together on the same picture plane. And then I was like, okay, this is a little rigid. Why do we just have to have people who are connected to each other? But I think part of it is my energy changed physically, right? And so then I started compiling different people together. And then I actually think of the bearing witness almost as portraiture because they're really an articulation of a connection with a human being, which is sort of like what a portrait is, only it doesn't have a face exactly. So for me, I think of it as like a marker of that person or of their thoughts or of their research. And so, and I think that also kind of globally, and I wonder too, like I got my master's degree in Berlin and I finished in 2017. So that sort of blew my practice from small to way big. And so I think it was like, well, okay, everybody can go together. So why can't we all do something together? Because that's more, and I also think, maybe it's a long answer, I studied psychology when I did my undergraduate 100 years ago. And so that interest never went anywhere. It never left me. And I think that interest in the human connection and human existence and being kind of coupled with this idea of marking people. And I'm also really interested in how can I express, like if you talk to me and tell me something really intimate, so we had a one-on-one moment that was really meaningful, and I want to be able to share that with you all. But I need to be respectful of our confidence, right? So it has to be confidential, and it can be monumental because I can share that moment in a certain way visually.
Cool. I wanted to go back. So I was sort of going back to the works that are previous in the gallery, but maybe we can go back into the dark room, back into the darkness. I really appreciated that you were talking about this particular site. You know, you did works on, water, hope, conversation, and now this is all about the nexus of well-being. I like how you chose the term well-being instead of the word curing.
Yeah.
And so I talk about this a little bit in my essay. No plug there, but but I think that what was really significant to me was that you're making conversation for pain and transformation. And literally those words like transform from something that I see in the gallery, like, to meaning. And then I see it transform to something really dark and intimate, like it's like a smaller scaled piece, embraceable meaning. Yeah. Things that look like canvas that are lit by galleries are now lighting themselves. They look like stone and stuff. So I love that idea of transformation.
Very poetic. I like it.
But it goes back. I really wanted to cite this author, Ed Cullen, who is a queer theorist. But he talks about the distinction between curing, the idea of curing and healing. And that curing is this idea that one is receives an ailment and illness, and then through the curing process, you return back to how you were before. But healing is actually like a process of embracing that you'll never be the same, that like sometimes traumas and wounds will last, but they'll scar and you'll be better afterward for it. And so I just wanted to thank you for helping me, or kind of inviting the sort of like darker tinge of what it means to heal and transform. Okay, well, did we have any more to say? Do you want to talk?
I really like I like the word transform, and I like thinking about those light windows as like a place because they are transformative. If they're on, they're one thing. If they're off, they're another. And I think someone was telling me who operates the tours here that young people feel like they're portals. And that's kind of interesting to think of them as portals, like as a young person, because they have this kind of depth. So there's this like transformative moment. There's this kind of metaphor for light and dark. And then maybe we can go somewhere if we enter them, and that's even cooler.
Yeah, I think portal is a good way to go back into the light from darkness, or vice versa. Sometimes you're goth and you just want to be in darkness. But I think that to come full circle, I wanted to return back to will to meaning, because what's really unique about it is like literally in the didactic, you invite us to sit on the ground. So I'm grounded. I think about the place that you chose, the site that you chose, the project. But I don't have to stay on the ground. I can climb and like I can look at it in detail. I can read the words embedded in it. I can follow a trace of glitter and find a new color when I reach the peak of it. So I love this idea of ascent. Like that brings me a lot of chills just looking at it and looking at you. But I actually, when I was preparing for this, I saw that you were on a news station, WCCO, CBS Minnesota. So shout out to that interview to CBS Minnesota. But the 4, and you talked about awe.
Yeah.
So I just could you elaborate on this idea of
Sure.
awe? Yeah.
One of the things that's I'm working with color because I know it can be transformative and it can be emotional. You can respond emotionally to it, and scale, right? And so at this scale, you can have a moment of wonder and awe as you're looking at a work like this. And I discovered a researcher in Berkeley, by the way, who does research on awe. And what we know about awe from his research is that when we experience awe and wonder, we have a moment where we think we're not focused so much on ourselves, we're thinking about other people. And we know also from the research that when we're focused on other people and not so much of ourselves, we're a little bit happier. So it's kind of there's part of the scale that's really part of that. I want to create a moment of wonder. Now, children, if they come into the gallery, they come around the corner and they run in because they're so excited because this thing is big and it's moving and it's exciting. So they're my best critics, and I really appreciate them because they get really excited. And I think that they're expressing this kind of moment of like, wow, and how'd you do that? And it doesn't mean that it's like spectacular, like the I don't know, pyramids or something. There's something called everyday awe where we can train ourselves to understand that moments can be, if we acknowledge moments of everyday awe, there's research that says if we make an effort to have these experiences of everyday awe, we feel better, right? And so there's enough stuff that isn't making us feel better. So I'm all about anything that we can do to provide those moments. And I think as an artist, that's something I can do. Like, that's within my wheelhouse. I can do something really big that can respond to light and color and scale and provide a moment of wonder. So I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. I love that you replace this idea of, so training as an art historian, the first time that we come across the feeling that you're describing comes around the idea of the sublime. And the sublime is those kind of grand landscape paintings that are like the size of walls. Actually, they have a lot of examples at the Marine Art Museum.
I know.
Where you also had a show.
Exactly.
A lot of stories.
Yeah.
But the sublime is this idea, it came around the Romantic period, around Romantic literature. And it's this idea that there's a divinity of God, and then there's also hell and earth. There is the grandiosity of nature, and then there's man, the smallness of man that can control it. And so there's this this kind of push and pull of light and darkness, but it's very much coming from a very Christian heaven, hell, nature, man. And I think that eventually the way that they described it, one historian, was the feeling that when you're on the top of the mountain and that overwhelming fear suddenly feels weirdly beautiful. So that the pictures of David Caspar Friedrich, the guy on top of the mountain looking at the fog. But I love that you've replaced that fear with awe. You've replaced that fear with wonder and curiosity. And I appreciate that I can sort of ascend with that work in this exhibition with you. I think that my last question, what are some recent projects that are percolating? And if there's any recent completed installations that may have happened locally.
Could have. Today, there might have been one. Maybe. Okay, so there was an installation today that I'm really excited about that has 16 works, and then it's compared, as I mentioned earlier, with the squares from the research, and that's at a local health facility. And I'm really excited both to partner with them and also for all the participatory people that have helped make that happen. And then they're baby scrolls. They're 1 foot by 6 foot. And I was afraid to do them actually because they're so small. I thought, well, what's this going to be like? They're really small, but it was good. It was actually really worked out great. And then I think I'm working on, I have an exhibition at the Athenaeum in La Jolla, California in November. And I'm just trying to figure out, I've started making some of the work, and I want to do something really big and installation based in the center, which I can't quite get my fingers around exactly, but working on that. And then in 2024 at the Minnesota State Capitol, there'll be a exhibition of the 122 Conversations project. And that's kind of exciting because that'll be a Minnesota moment, and I'm excited to highlight that, and among other things that I can think of just now. Oh, and then actually there's a really cool thing. The neurology department here at the Mayo Clinic has a wonderful conference coming up about brain health, and I'm going to participate in that, and we're going to make a quilt made out of that material and with the participants, which I'm really excited about.
Do you want to talk about the material? Or did you
Yeah,
think
sure.
of
I
something?
know. I forget that. Yeah. Yes. So the material is Tyvek, and the reason I started working with the material that basically all the things are in the gallery and the quilt I was talking about, it's a construction material, and it's very, very, very thin. And I needed it for an exhibition that was traveling internationally to places that didn't have Post or FedEx or UPS. So I had to put it in a suitcase and have someone carry it. So I switched to it. It's a very difficult material because it's a vapor barrier. So it's beautiful and looks really flowy and it wants to be elegant. And it does, but Jay, you're here, aren't you? You were here for the installation.
Oh wait, that's different, Shay. We keep pointing at Shay.
So it really requires a lot of work to make it look so beautiful because it actually wants to crimp and not flow in that way. So it's like wonderful, and yet it requires some effort to be to look as fabric-like as it does. It took me 3.5 months to figure out how to work on it because it's a vapor barrier. So if you ever have a material that's completely sealed, the water pills up on it, right? It makes these balls on it. That's what that stuff does. So it took a long time to figure it out. Now, now I really understand how to make the material do what I want it to do. And painting on both sides is great because it provides a translucent material, which is what you see in those light windows, right? Because they look blue from the front if they're off, but then you get the color. So that's actually a recent development that took 2 years. So I love the material, pretty much obsessed. Mm-hmm.
Well, I appreciate that because I always saw Tyvek in
all around
the scaffolding of construction.
Yeah.
I also thought that I was like, Tyvek, isn't that what PPE is made at?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
it's keeping us safe. It's keeping us safe in a way. Now I mean something different, right?
Literally vapor. Yeah. But I think I kind of in awe of the labor that you said it's vapor barrier, so it doesn't absorb or take material well. So you have the sheer force or alchemy that you have to perform on the material to make it become a rainbow, to make it balletic or dance or make it mournful or melancholic. So I appreciate the way that you can transmute that. I think that we're at time. I just wanted to recognize you for being not only an amazing artist, but an amazing ethnographer for the work that you did to compose the work. And I heard filmmaker and choreography, sculptor, you can do it all. And thank you just very wholly for your kindness of spirit and being an amazing friend to me and for making this really beautiful love letter, as I said last time, but it truly does read like such a love letter to those who take care of us. So thank you so much, Anne.
Thank you for coming. Thank you.